Austin Faith Dialogue, at the crossroads of religion and life, a series highlighting the cultural and social interactions with the worshiping and religious communities in and around the capital city. Austin Faith Dialogue is brought to you by the Austin Area Interreligious Ministries in cooperation with KNVA. Join us now for Austin Faith Dialogue.
Welcome to Austin Faith Dialogue. I'm Carl Gronberg, host of the program. One of the reasons we've been doing this for almost 20 years is because we believe in Austin Faith Dialogue there are so many interesting people within our community. And one of the most interesting is with me today, Margaret Hoffman. Welcome to Austin Faith Dialogue.
Thank you.
So delighted to have you here. And
what
as
an
I told you,
introduction.
well, I've thought about you and wanted to have you here. And then when you were honored by Church Women United and received that award, I thought, I have to talk to Margaret about her life. But let's talk a little bit about that, all right? You grew up where?
The first 8 years in Berlin. That's always Berlin, Germany. That has always been my home, and I've been homesick for Berlin most of my life.
Have you been able to make it back and visit?
I've been back several times, and I think I've got over the homesickness finally.
Which means that maybe then you become really a Texan then, because you've been here since 1950.
Right, I've been here since 1950.
But during those years that you were a child, there were all kinds of things happening in Germany and in Europe, and things you were watching that made history for a lot of us.
And not very comfortable history. We lived in Berlin when Hitler came to power, and we saw all the marches and the songs and everybody yelling hooray. You know, we saw all this, and it was very exciting for a 6-year-old.
To see that.
Oh, yeah.
And it was all post World War I, and there was the economic problems, and there were other things going on. Your father was in a Christian family, and your mother was in a Jewish family.
My mother was Jewish, and my father was, I guess in Berlin people tend to be Lutheran, so there's not much question about that. You were just Lutheran. You know?
Lutherans of the Christian community, and then your father was a fascinating man, you told me. He gave you some of the independent spirit that you have, Margaret, I think, and you once said to me that you are truly your father's daughter. Tell us a little bit about your dad. As he was going through some of the rituals of his Lutheran Christian background, he chose to go a different direction.
Well, unfortunately, until after he died, did I realize how similar our spirits were, and I wish we could have talked about them more. But he never left Berlin, at least not after the war. So he did not come here, and we could not discuss a lot of things. But what I find so fascinating about him is that when he was to be confirmed in the Lutheran Church, was very routine. Every 14-year-old was confirmed. That's when he got his first suit, and when he got some presents, and when he was the center of attention. In Germany at that time, children were not only not supposed to be heard, they're not supposed to be seen either, but that's one day you're the center of attention. So you went to some kind of like Sunday school, through classes, and it was expected of you, and you're supposed to be very proud of it and all that. But my father said at barely 14, I'm not going to be confirmed. And after my grandparents recovered, what shall the neighbors say? What do you mean you're going to be confirmed? The poor pastor's going to have that in his resume, that the one kid caused trouble. He could not persuade, you know.
Right.
But he said, nobody can tell me what to believe. And I thought, gee, now I know whose child I am, you know. I've always found it very difficult to repeat the various phrases that we believe this, and then we believe that, and we believe that. And that's probably one reason I became a Quaker. I found that Quakerism fit, because you don't have this dogma. You're more on your own conscience, on your own persuasion. And if we had all the time in the world, I would tell you in 3 minutes just what Quakerism is all about.
Well, we're going to explore that Quaker relationship and the Quaker congregation here in Austin, but I'm really fascinated with your father and your mother, and They, 14 years of age, he said, I'm not going to go through what we call now affirmation of baptism, confirmation. And but by the time he was 18, he actually left the Christian community.
Then he
Is that right?
left the church and just did his own thinking. And but he was, well, other boys were playing soccer and got in trouble, and he was reading German translations of Shakespeare and Goethe and Schiller and.
Very intellectual type person,
yeah,
then, yeah.
Very much so.
And he met your mother, and she was from a Jewish family.
Well, he was very much taken with the Jewish religion and the Jewish way of thinking, and and then he met this beautiful Jewish young lady, and that was my mother.
And the year they were married, Margaret, when would that have been?
They were married about 1920.
Okay, right after the First World War.
Right after the war. My father was in the war. I have a picture of him wearing a uniform, which is quite difficult to fathom. But he said he detested everything military after that. Those few months, if the war was out in 1918, those few months were sufficient for him to detest everything military.
And that anti-war philosophy of your father's is also a part of who you are, right?
Oh yeah, very much so. After 6 years in bomb shelters, I was very much questioning the logic of using wars to solve international conflicts. That seemed to me very illogical. How can you solve conflicts by dropping explosives on families? This is going to create a lot of hatred and last forever, before you can see any positive results.
Your mother and father married.
My parents married,
and you were born, or your brother?
I had a brother who died fairly recently, and myself, and my mother was. She would not practice Judaism because, for one thing, they didn't. They were all so assimilated they didn't realize they were Jewish until Hitler told them. I found it in some papers, but.
But yet there became a spirit of anti-Semitism in Germany. And
oh yeah, that came, and it came in other countries too. Except you have to read Hannah Arendt to read about how this all developed in other countries, and I was not quite as aware of that either until I read her book on Eichmann.
And your mother and father decided that they needed to go separate ways.
Well,
is that right?
My parents, of course, we're looking at it now with the wisdom of hindsight, and one has to be very careful not to make any judgment based on the wisdom of hindsight. During the Kristallnacht, which
explain that to our viewers.
Kristallnacht was
1938. Is
1938. Hitler was looking. Well, the Olympics were over. This would probably carry us too far now, but the Olympics were over, so Hitler did not have to make a good impression on the rest of the world anymore. I'm not sure if he made it at that time either, but anyway. So he was now looking for something, some catalyst to really get the persecution of the Jews going. He was determined. I still have all the papers and books from those days, the originals actually I have at home, how they arrived at these views that the Jews have to be annihilated. They're just the worst of the worst. And never mind the Russians and then the war, or British or Americans, the Jews had to be annihilated. Even while the wars were going on, the trains had to be reserved to carry the Jews away. He had this fixation there, but you asked to what extent the
so Mom and Dad decided then that when this kind of atmosphere was...
Well, the atmosphere came to a zenith, to a high point, when a young Jewish fellow, all of 17, killed a German who was working in the German consulate in Paris. It's a long story, and I'm sorry that I have to abbreviate everything like this. I still remember how my father was listening to the radio trying to see did this man die or not. And when he died, then we knew that all hell was going to break loose, and it did. It was the catalyst that Hitler was looking for to attack all Jews in the most horrible form. And the details of that, again, I've written up. I have that all at home. But the Nazis also came to our
your
apartment.
home?
They had the list of all the Jews that they were supposed to go and throw the furniture out of the windows and break everything and arrest men, especially men with money. They were supposed to arrest. That too, I have these details. But my father managed to get rid of them again. I don't know how he managed that, but he managed to get rid of them after
They didn't arrest your mother that night?
No, they hit my father, and what I find sadly amusing is that my father's huge library that he had, thousands of books he had in his house. He spent all his forever reading. And Nazis looked at these books and said, "Oh, typical Jewish." That's
kind of a stereotype, huh?
Yeah, that the Jews read a lot and try to be very intellectual and educated, but they use that as to downgrade them. But my father managed to, for some way or another, get rid of them. But that's when my parents decided they should live separately. It would be better for our children, for their children, for us not to live with
for your brother and yourself.
Yeah, with a Jewish parent. And my father felt that he could better care for her and care for our many other Jewish friends and relatives that we had. And he was the one who made enough money so he could care for all of those. If they had remained married, he would immediately been downgraded to a janitor's job and could not have cared for all these people. So it was difficult to say, and I'm always very careful not to pass judgment.
What was going on in your mind as you looked as a youngster, as a young person, seeing all this kind of chaos erupting all around you, and then
well,
your mother was sent to a concentration camp?
Not until several years later, until 1944, and those, again, are long stories, especially since it involves her relatives and very close friends of ours, and those are very important stories that I would like to tell you someday in detail, because they deserve that kind of relating. 3 years, no, the next year, in 1939 is when the war started. And at first, being a teenager, this was all very interesting. You went to school, you climbed through all the rubble and everything, and you went to school, hoping that the school had not also burnt down during the night, which it did one night. And then for show and tell, whoever has found the biggest dud, seen the biggest dud that had not yet exploded,
like
or
a
whatever.
Mortar shell or
mortar
something?
shells and Flak. But the Flak is a German abbreviation for Fliegerabwehrkanone, which is the well.
You're going to have to translate it for me, Margaret, I'm afraid.
Anyway,
I don't know.
It's the problem is, as you know, I'm at an age where I lose words myself, and suddenly I cannot think of the exact translation of this word. But that's where the word Flak comes from the
German.
from a German Flieger.
And you went to school during the war.
Oh,
and
yeah.
It must have been terribly disruptive. Were you in high school?
I was in high school, and we exchanged our various experiences we had. And after about a year or so, it got serious. The raids got very serious.
And you were in Berlin?
No, we lived at that time in Düsseldorf, but that was getting to be very serious because it was close to the industrial part of Germany. The Ruhr
And
section.
bombing raids were coming in?
Bomb raids are coming more and more, and after 3 or 4 raids during any one night, it's pretty difficult to go to school in the morning. The whole school experience, of course, is a different story. Again, there were some Jewish children in my class too.
Margaret, I saw a picture at your home that you shared with me, and I really want to tell our viewing audience just all the treasures that you have. Well, it's you as a young woman in Dusseldorf, and you're standing there, and you're dressed very wonderfully, and you look beautiful, if you don't mind me saying this. And you told me as we looked at that picture that you when you look at that picture, you kind of wonder what was that young woman thinking? What was that young person? What was going through her mind? Because everything was changing around her. The world was changing. You had seen lots of disruptive elements.
I know what you're talking about. It is in Dresden, and
I was in Dresden.
that was in Dresden,
Okay.
and in front of the beautiful Zwinger, which was totally shredded during the raids and has been rebuilt. I had gone there, found a job there. It was a city that was totally like peacetime. And then you probably know that Dresden suffered the worst raids anywhere in the world except for Hiroshima.
The bombing.
Yeah, the bombing raids, and that's another whole long story again. But I enjoyed it so to be in a city that was not bombed. I mean, there were still concerts.
There's
I mean,
still
big
culture
concerts,
going
but
on.
there's still culture going on. There were still buildings that weren't bombed out. There were still windows in the buildings. You could walk the street without the smell of gas or without mangled people too. In Düsseldorf, you know, we were used to gas smells and roped off areas because there were duds that could blow up any minute. But here was a city that was still gorgeous. But I must tell you about this picture because I had an old camera. I handed it to somebody, said, do me a favor, take a picture of me. I need to send this home. Otherwise my family will not believe that I found a city that is not bombed. But the jacket, to this day, it worries me. The jacket I was wearing belonged to a friend of ours who was Jewish, who had just been murdered. And I've written about this a great deal because it concerns me that what I felt when I wore this jacket. A fabulous woman, she was a lawyer, and she had just been shipped off and murdered. And that I could wear it. Was I without feelings? I know I was not. It was just a different. There was a jacket, so you wear it, you know. But still, the whole idea has bothered me a lot, and I've written about it, and it's been published quite a bit because this was an aspect of the Nazis after the war, you know, Germans after the war, that they would be thinking about this, and that's why many magazines picked up that particular story. Yeah.
Because what I thought of as I looked at it, here's a young woman. That is there a future? Is there still potential for the future? And I think it was obvious that in spite of all of what was going on, what had happened in the past and what was going on in your life then, that somehow you were looking towards the future, and that future would take you out of the ruins of war, out of Germany.
I don't think I thought that far because I didn't know anything but war and Nazis, 12 years Nazis. So I couldn't comprehend that there was anything that different, that there was such a thing as not having a war. So the real thinking of future was also not realistic, knowing that I had this Jewish background.
And yet I think
too.
about what your father said to you after the First World War, and how he had so much questions about war, and the violence, the immorality, if you will, the evil of war, that you must have listened to as a child, and yet now you were living it. You were there as a young adult, and now as a person looking back upon those years, you still have a position anti-war.
Oh, still more so. I mean, if you live through that, you know, you ask yourself more and more often, why? Why is there no other way of solving problems among heads of state? Because they can't stand each other, so they send the young people to kill each other. But
Sacrifice the youth.
yeah, but is there no other way to solve problems than dropping explosives on families?
And Dresden received that. Hiroshima, Nagasaki received that of dropping of bombs.
Well, that's a whole other story again.
And yet, but I'm thinking, then you came to the United States.
I did in 46. I have to give.
How did that happen, Margaret?
Well, I have to give a lot of credit to President Truman, who had his own wars at the end of the war. He had lots of wars. was beginning to see what the Soviet Union was really after. They didn't dare look at that closely while they're allied. But then, of course, it became very obvious, and they each had the atom bomb, and and then you had millions of young men coming back from the war, and they had to find jobs or something.
But how did you? You didn't
Well,
fit any of those categories.
No, I didn't.
You were
but
not a young man coming back from the war. How does it happen that you came to the United States?
Well, he had, or there had been established categories of potential, or those who may be permitted to immigrate, certain qualifications, stipulations, and I happened to get a hold of a list like this, and I looked down the list, and I thought, wait a minute, I might actually qualify.
And yet your father stayed behind.
My father stayed behind, and
Brother?
he stayed behind. We sent for him later, but he stayed behind. But of course, I'm big on guilt, you know. So I felt right away, maybe I shouldn't go. People like myself, we have a conscience, ought to stay here and see what can be salvaged in this country or in the continent. But then on the other hand, seeing that I might actually go and live in a country where I could take a job, get paid, and buy care packages and send them home. That was the whole thing.
By the way,
yes.
you know, that's one of the things that in my family I heard when I was a child, sending care packages to Germany. And as a matter of fact, my family growing up out in the Pacific Northwest, we would receive letters from the family in Germany that we were sending care packages to. So out of the devastation and the terrible reality of war, the linkage, you know, that happened. And that's what I think about you. I follow you along, and I've listened to your story at your home, and I've watched you through the years as you served on the city council in Austin. I mean, there's always been kind of that spirit that there was potential in human beings, and that there was the possibility of making a difference with your life.
Oh yeah, well, I've always felt, you know, if you survived, you have responsibilities. The survivor's guilt, but more the survivor's responsibility.
I'm also
always felt.
interested from the faith perspective, because here you had a father who did not practice the Christian faith and actually moved out of it, and a mom who was sent off to the concentration camp, a Jewish person. And yet when you came to this country, then you became, or you found the Quaker congregation. Or
Well, let me give you 10 seconds of what I did. First, I took a very dangerous trip to Berlin.
Before you came to America.
About less than a year before, because I still did not know who of my relatives had survived the war. There was still no communication and whatnot. But there was a way. You knew I would find a way, right? You know me, that I would find ways. I found a way. In the back of an ambulance, of a Belgian ambulance driven by French nurses. I know enough French to know what they were saying.
And you rode in that ambulance.
I was in that ambulance, and I got so scared because if the Russians had stopped us, you know, the Russian soldiers.
Right.
A very, very bad situation, and so when we came to the border and got across the border, I said, if I make it to Berlin and back, I'll go to church every Sunday.
You bargained.
I didn't bargain. I just promised I would do that. And I had meanwhile been baptized Catholic.
Okay.
And I really tried hard. But,
And were you baptized Roman Catholic in Germany?
In Germany, reason being, and so was my brother, that my father felt that we might enjoy greater security if we're definitely not Jewish.
Yeah.
And I tried very hard. And I drove the poor priest crazy. I asked him, why this, why that, why should I believe this, you know? But I tried, and I went to Catholic church every Sunday. I came over here. People said, you're going to church every Sunday? I'm going to church every Sunday. I promised it, and I did.
So when you came to America,
I still kept this up. I mean, promise. I said, promise.
You made the promise.
Oh, yeah.
To go to Mass every Sunday.
Yeah, every Sunday. I mean, that's promises.
You know, and that's a part of the story. When I was at your home, you didn't tell me about that. And so
I couldn't tell you
I'm glad that Awesome Faith Dialogue viewers are hearing this story for the first time, and I am too.
Yeah.
But then, what happened with the
but
Quaker?
I knew I could not handle, again, being told what to believe. It's, you know, everything's proscribed. You believe this and this. I can't do that at all. I felt I was...
So your journey then took you to the Quakers?
Yeah, and I had encountered some Quakers in Germany and within the UNRWA, United Nations Services. There were some Quakers in there, and it always seemed to be right. It always seemed to fit. And I think we are being told that we're getting to the end here.
And you warned me that we wouldn't have enough time for all this. But what we're going to do is have you come back. I really want you to tell us just a little bit. You came here. You became a part of the city council back in the 70s.
After I had 5 children, and I have no idea how I ever did it all.
Yeah, and Otto, your husband, was a music organ builder. You were doing all those kinds of things.
I wrote some books.
And what do you remember about that city council experience?
Oh my God. I cannot tell you in 1 minute or less. That is. I was determined to do the right thing, so I was never a politician. You're supposed to care for what is right for the. You're supposed to care for the next generation and not for the next election.
Leave something for the next generation. And is that one reason, though, you were known as the tree person, because you loved trees to be planted?
Well, it just seemed the logical thing to do, to save these huge trees that took 300 or 400 years growing, rather than putting in the parking lot there.
People would say, well, why don't you just relax now? You're a senior adult. But you're not willing to do that, are you? You told me you don't want to be bored.
Well, there's no question of being bored. I'm panicky because I'm one of the few survivors of World War II who still ask why, and what else, how can we do it differently? How can we protect young people from the propaganda that tells them that war is a glorious thing to do? So this is my big concern.
Well, I think, you're wearing a button that says violence begets violence. And I think what you're saying to me is that you're saying that there is a different way, a better way, and a way that we can share life. Austin is a wonderful place, and you're a part of this story, and we're so very grateful for that. The Quakers, the Quaker congregation, and I just have a minute, they are joining in now, right? And they are buying a piece of property on Martin Luther King. Is that where it is?
We have bought St. James Church, St. James Episcopal Church, because they are moving to a larger facility.
Right.
We've bought their facility, and we are making this double move. They're moving out. We're moving in within a couple of weeks, or as we speak, I don't know.
And so the Quaker congregation and St. James Episcopal will be together. And that says something about all of you, that you can live together in peace and harmony.
We won't even live together because they are moving to a bigger place.
Well, we want you to come back to this place. And we thank all of you for being with us in Austin Faith Dialogue. Know your story, your faith journey. Margaret Hoffman has just an amazing faith story, and we hope that we can continue to share those as we grow to respect and appreciate and learn to live together in harmony and peace. Blessings be to you as you live your potential each day of your life. Thank you.